There's a tiny Swiss village that lies at the foot of the fearsome Forget-Me-Not Mountain, with 200 dwellers, a school and an inn, and a forge beside Catchpenny Fountain, where lived a young fellow called Peter John Cade, a fine mountaineer, though a blacksmith by trade, and a good many valiant attempts he had made to conquer Forget-Me-Not Mountain. He'd set off several times at the first light of day with his clampons, his guy rope and pack, and his wife and his children were often afraid that one day he might never come back. For at every attempt with just yards left to go, poor Peter John Cade would be forced back below by the blizzards, the cold, and the torrents of snow from the mighty Forget-Me-Not Mountain. But his friends would console him and say, "Never mind, to fail is no crime or disgrace, for no one has conquered Forget-Me-Not ever. It's an evil and perilous place. Come, drink up your beer and join in with our song. You must learn to accept that it's here you belong. You are only human, however you long to conquer Forget-Me-Not Mountain." But Peter John Cade could not leave matters there, and his singing was only half-hearted, and he vowed that tomorrow he'd conquer the mountain. At first light of dawn he'd get started. Though his young wife and children were always impressed when they said, "Never mind, Dad, and you did your best," Peter's dreams and ambition allowed him no rest till he'd conquered Forget-Me-Not Mountain. With a tearful farewell at the first light of dawn, young Peter began his ascent, with his guy rope and clampons, his pack, and clean socks which his mother had thoughtfully sent. Braving bleak days and many a spine-chilling night, young Peter climbed higher with all of his might, till the beckoning summit was almost in sight at the top of Forget-Me-Not Mountain. Though he'd managed it further than ever before, more than all other climbers had gone, still the blizzards blew hard and the ice froze him blue, yet the faith in his heart drove him on. When he saw that above him was nothing but sky, he let out a triumphant and heartening cry, for no man on earth had climbed nearly so high as the peak of Forget-Me-Not Mountain. He gazed down at the village, a speck way below, where he'd lived for the whole of his life, the houses no bigger than grains of brown sand, and he thought of his children and wife. What a story to tell, what a tale to impart. They'd make him a hero, a man of great heart, and he felt he should put on clean socks for a start, since he'd conquered Forget-Me-Not Mountain. But just as he took his clean socks from his pack, the strangest of sights caught his eye, for not 5 yards away sat a dignified elk on a chair at a table nearby, wearing tinted sunshades and Bermuda-styled shorts, and ponderously puffing a clay pipe of sorts as he preened his fine antlers, collecting his thoughts, gazing out from Forget-Me-Not Mountain. Young Peter was dumbstruck indeed at this sight of an elk in such dazzling Bermudas, and he wondered if it would be hostile or not to the presence of hapless intruders, and it seemed that a good half an hour had passed till the elk turned his face to young Peter at last, who was breathless, surprised, and quite frankly aghast at this elk on Forget-Me-Not Mountain. "Ah, welcome, my friend," said the elk with a smile. "So, you've finally settled your score. Now, is this your 6th or your 7th attempt? I'm afraid I lost count after 4, but I've followed your progress with interest, my friend. I admire a young man who keeps on till the end, but who would have thought that an elk you'd befriend at the peak of Forget-Me-Not Mountain?" "I'm sorry," said Peter. "Forgive my surprise, but how did you ever get here? It's not that I'm not pleased to meet you, I'm sure, but your presence to me is unclear." "Of course," said the elk, "I can quite understand, for indeed there are few elks in all Switzerland, so a meeting with me you could hardly have planned at the peak of Forget-Me-Not Mountain." "Forgive me for asking," said Peter John Cade, "but how can you wear floral shorts in this bone-chilling climate, and sunglasses too? You're clearly the strangest of sorts." "Well, I'm covered in fur, and I've plenty of hair, so I'm perfectly warm in this cold mountain air. Thus it doesn't much matter whatever I wear," said the elk of Forget-me-not Mountain. "Of course," said young Peter, "you're perfectly right. You must think me terribly rude." "No, no," said the elk. "You must question whatever you don't understand, as you've proved. Your strong single-mindedness I must condone. Yet you've nobody with you. You've climbed all alone, and the mind can play tricks on a man on his own," said the elk of Forget-me-not Mountain. "I'm afraid I don't follow," said Peter John Cade. "Very well," said the elk. "I'll explain. Since now you have proved what you've set out to prove, you will have no need to prove it again. But suppose that you think, as you very well might, that now you could conquer whatever's in sight. Now, true or not, you'd be convinced you were right," said the elk of Forget-me-not Mountain. "You may think that if you can climb mountains so high, you could swim the wide oceans as well, or jump from a treetop and land on your feet, or challenge the demons from hell." "Oh, don't be absurd," replied Peter John Cade. "I've not climbed for glory or great accolade. I've just proved to myself I need not be afraid of heights like Forget-me-not Mountain." "Indeed," said the elk, "you have just proved my point, and your thoughts are already unstuck. It is folly to think that you're never afraid, for though skilful, you're not without luck. You're a gifted young climber, that's certainly true, but the mountain shall always be greater than you. And to say that you're fearless is not strictly true," said the elk of Forget-me-not Mountain. "For fear is a thing which is born in all men. Indeed, it's what drives a man on. A man without fear is a strange man indeed, and not to be counted upon. Do you see that if you were alone at this height, your thoughts could be wayward and lacking in sight? And I'm here to help you keep matters aright," said the elk of Forget-me-not Mountain. "My words may seem strange," said the elk with a smile. "I can quite understand what you think. So let us enjoy this fine view from on high. Perhaps you might care for a drink." And the two of them sat for a while in the snow and drank down their glasses of schnapps in one go, and they gazed over Switzerland way down below at the foot of Forget-me-not Mountain.